Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the ValuesJam guest session series. And Jessica, brilliant to have you here. So to start with, please introduce yourself and tell everybody about the great work that you do.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, it's really a pleasure to be here with you today. So my name's Jessica Ball. I'm a freelance facilitator. I have actually recently been working predominantly in international development, but my heart is bringing me back to the thing that I'm really most passionate about, which is dialogue and communication skills in general. So these days, yeah, I'm really working on some new workshop offers around the power of communication. So looking at dialogue and power paradigms, and all things Bohemian dialogue, really. So yeah, watch this space, I guess.
Yeah, and you're the person that introduced me to David Bohm's dialogue. So what are you able to share something about that in a couple of minutes?
Yeah, sure. So David Bohm, as you know, was a quantum physicist. In his later life, he became very interested in thought and how our thinking creates our reality. And he began practicing a process of dialogue, a practice and a process, and drew inspiration from indigenous ways of being and family therapy. And it's really about coming together with a group of people sitting in circles. So the circle is inclusive and non-hierarchical, and really deep listening, and really being aware of what's happening in our body, what's happening in our own inner dialogue. And really, we talk in a dialogue to the center. And so David Bohm would say the meaning of dialogue is to follow the flow of meaning. So when you bring a group of people together to share their own experiences, and their own meaning, they create meaning together. And the hope is that out of that, some new thinking will arise. And he was a contemporary of Einstein, and Einstein obviously really famously said that we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking that we use to create them. And I think this is it, that we need to come together. Actually, I have this post-it next to me, funnily enough, on my desk about this question of dialogue. And he really said that it's important that it's individual and collective. So it's not enough that we just talk one-to-one, that we really need to come together. And I think there's such a kind of a wave of obviously like personal development work, inner development work, which is great. But like actually the only reason that we work on ourselves, I think, is so that we can be a resource for others. And so we need to come together collectively. And I think there's sometimes a bit of fear of coming together as a group, as you know, we live in a really increasingly polarized world, and we need to break through that fear and kind of sit together in dialogue and really think together. And so it's a really powerful process, and yeah, one that does require a bit of courage, and a real creative mindset. So yeah, it's a really, really exciting process and one that I'm very passionate about.
Yeah, and quite rightly so. And I can vouch for how powerful it is. And when we have Values Jam deep dive conversations, it's this process that the conversation is based on when there are enough people. And the feedback is unanimously, people use words like, what a beautiful experience that was, which is just great. Okay, so we're going to choose a card from the Values Jam deck. So I'm just going to tip them out. How many piles shall I make in front of me?
I would like three, please.
You would like three. They're going to be of different sizes. And so would you like my left, middle, or right pile?
I would like your right pile, please.
Jessica, you've chosen well. That's the smallest pile. So I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 cards. So a number between 1 and 12.
I'm gonna go six.
6.
Yes, please. Do I win like a prize?
Yes, you do. This is the card that you've chosen. How do you feel
Oh,
about that?
I mean, I feel very grateful to see gratitude on the screen. I'm always happy to see gratitude.
So, first question is this: what does gratitude mean? And what does it look, feel, and sound like?
What does gratitude mean? Um, So gratitude, obviously, a feeling of being grateful. I think lots of people will resonate with having a gratitude practice and this kind of research around how we can rewire our brains by just practicing a daily gratitude. So thinking of 3 things that day that we feel grateful for. And that's something that I've definitely done. And I think just really taking stock of how much we actually have. Like, I'm grateful for my home, I'm grateful for my friends and my family. For me, in some of the workshops, the very first workshops I ever did actually around values, when I wanted to talk to people about their values and found that hard to do in a conversation and started doing that within a workshop setting, one of the first exercises I did was get everyone to write all the things that they need to survive and all the things that they need to thrive. And what arose very often from those lists of words and the conversation afterwards is how much we take for granted in the survive list. Because very often people, they might put food, water, but they will forget like soil or air or sunlight. So the very things that like Mother Nature provides for us to actually sustain life, to keep us alive, those are the things that actually we also need to be incredibly grateful for, and that we've lost that sense of connection and gratitude because we take it for granted. And look where we are with the world, like look how we've destroyed nature. So I think bringing people back to this connection of what is sustaining their life and a sense of deep gratitude for that. And I think a really nice companion value to gratitude is reciprocity. So when you feel grateful for something and you want to like honor it and acknowledge it, you also feel that you're moved to want to give back. So this like cycle of giving and receiving, I think it's a really nice companion to gratitude. And so I think that's the second part of your question of kind of what does it look and feel like for me is acknowledgement, like really feeling that in my body, and then some sense of, well, what do I give back in return?
What a great start. And you've touched on a number of things here. So you use the words that were in my head actually about taken for granted. And it is so easy to take stuff for granted, actually. And just every now and again, I don't know what it is about the bins that does this to me, but every now and again on bin collection day, I'll go out of the front door and the bins will have been collected. And I just think, how lucky I am actually that happened, without fail every week or fortnight or whatever it's supposed to be. And there are some people in some parts of the world that it just is not something that they can even entertain the thought of. And then yesterday we went for a lovely walk in the woods, and the blossoms just starting to come out. And just to be able to stand there and look at this beautiful white blossom with a little pink flash on it, really delicate. And yet it's so easy to just walk by because you're on a walk. So the question that came for me when I was listening to you is about, well, why do we take things for granted so much? And I wonder whether it's something to do with being too busy, and having our lives so full of stuff, and whether there's something about slowing down in order to be able to experience gratitude better. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I'm a big advocate of slow living. I think we definitely live too fast. And we're very distracted, obviously, by technology, our phones, deadlines. And I think for me, there is this kind of mechanistic mindset, that this kind of language of the machine that we are subtly or not so subtly confronted with in our daily lives, that we think we have to show up on time, be efficient, be productive, be consistent. Like this is all very like mechanistic language. And actually we're part of nature, like we're living human and being, like beings being the really important word, like that we're human beings, not human doings. And I think a lot of people are not really like fully embodied because of all the stress and all the busyness and all the distraction. And I guess what I was thinking of around the gratitude, and when you were talking about the blossom, and I also went for a walk yesterday and I also saw the blossom and I really, yeah, it was beautiful, is that we're not fully present. Like, and we had to be present, for me also, like you have to be embodied, you have to feel like it's a sensory experience of the world. So you go out, you smell, you touch, you see, you taste, you hear. This is a really important part of being present, and that requires real slowing down. So the moment that you can become like fully present and fully aware, then you're more awake and alive to what's around you, and then that sense of, oh, this is beautiful and I should feel grateful for it. So yeah, I think it's one of the big challenges at the moment of how do we bring back a better balance in our lives. So yeah, coming back more to connect with nature, I guess, and the cycles and rhythms of nature, which are slower and more varied and not like a machine.
Mm. And you reminded me when you were talking about being present and being aware, have you been to Japan?
I haven't. I would love to go, but I haven't.
Okay, so in Japan, there is a concept of hospitality called omotenashi, and the literal translation is hospitality. But it was described to me by somebody as taking personal pleasure from paying attention to fine detail in delivering a service, which I just love the description. Anyway, one of the pillars of Omotenashi is being tuned in. And so what they talk about is how you need to be really have a sense of heightened awareness of your environment and the people that you're dealing with within that environment, so that you can understand what it is they need, and then you can provide that to them, maybe without them even not needing to ask for it, and maybe not even realizing they needed it. And it's just such a brilliant concept. And there's lots of other things about it as well, but it's this tuned in bit that you reminded me of there. Um, what else? There was, you said this thing about, the mechanistic way in which we live our lives. And I agree with you, but I felt myself shudder when you said we all think we have to be on time, because I couldn't bear it if I wasn't on time. I just get really, really freaked out when something happens, which means I can't be there at the time that I said I would be for somebody.
Yeah, but I think that's different. I think being on time for someone, I imagine, is about respecting that person's time and, honoring the agreement and that kind of values approach to what it means to be on time when you've agreed to be on time for another person. But I think time is just a really interesting thing to reflect on. And I don't know if you've ever read Pip Pip by Jay Griffith, but it's an incredible book about time. And she talks about how we invented this mono time, this universal, very actual patriarchal colonial sense of time. And before that, there was no universal time. There is, in fact, no mono time. And I think scientists can't agree. Like, they don't even know if time exists, right? Like, I think it's this really interesting thing. So she talks about all these other experiences of time, like moon time, ocean time, cow time, bee time, like that place would have had a time. And that time would have reflected what was happening in nature. And that, for efficiency's sake, for maritime sake, for the train timetable sake, we created like a mono universal time that we are now all chained to, and it's actually not really that real, and it fits in with the other kind of very strong dominant narratives around like efficiency and productivity and yeah, mechanistic sort of language. And so yeah, I think it's for me, like I've really explored like this productivity, and there's another great book that I read recently called I Didn't Do the Thing Today, how to like free yourself of productivity guilt. And I think for me it's this notion of feeling like to use time well, you should always be productive. And actually, like if we're not doing something, if we're not being productive, then we are of no value, because that's the capitalist model of like you're only valuable when you're doing something that feeds the system. And so to be able to try and break free of that and say, actually, no, I'm valuable when I'm just being, and like I'm valuable when I'm offering myself and my gifts to the world without like monetary expectation of monetary return. So maybe like volunteering or doing something creative or spending time in nature. This kind of what do we mean by good quality being? Because like sitting and watching TV or scrolling your phone isn't good quality being. And like, what does that bring to your life when you allow yourself to be without any sense of the value attributed to that action or non-action?
Mm. And you're taking me to a place around. I've been thinking about goal setting quite a lot over the past few months, and it kind of dawned on, when you're waking up and you're not asleep and you're not awake. It was that sort of time that this dawned on me that I think goal setting is actually just so that we feel more in control. It's not actually beneficial in terms of helping us to achieve anything. So, for instance, if you set a goal, how many times have you heard people say, "Oh, yeah, I'm a little bit behind target, so I've put in place a corrective action plan to make up the 10% shortfall so that I'll be back on track." And actually, it's more important, it seems, for so many people to know that they're 10% short and to do something about that than it is to actually achieve anything. And especially in a world where things change so much, the goal might be irrelevant actually after 6 months. So what actually is the point of all of that? And to develop that a bit further, it then came to me that, well, is this because at least it's the known? You can describe it as the known, and we know that that's what we're supposed to achieve, and we can measure it against that, and so we can report against it and compare, rather than the being willing to just dive into the unknown where you have no idea about what's going to happen. But actually, the opportunities that present themselves can be so much more fulfilling. And I certainly have a sense of gratitude around being able to choose to do that, rather than what you should do in other people's eyes. So that I think that's quite similar in some ways to what you were describing there.
Yeah, I think again, like sort of bringing in David Bohm and his work on creativity and the creative mind, like he talks about really what it takes to be original in your thinking and how actually it requires being able to step into the unknown. And I think creative people who work with creative processes are probably more comfortable working with the unknown because it's very much a part of the creative process. Like you go into something with an inspiration, with an intuition, and with a experience that you're trying to express, but with you don't know what you're going to get at the end of that. Like you don't have an idea of, most creative people are not going into a process knowing what the outcome is going to be, which I've found is very hard for other people when you take, in my work as a facilitator, if I'm ever working with people around the creative design thinking process, it can be very hard for people to go into a process where you tell them that they're not allowed to know what they're going to have at the end of it, because in a business context or an academic context, most people are like, oh, well, I want to do this.
Yeah.
And that's actually really problematic, because this is filled with so many assumptions of what you think is needed, what you think is right, like how you've informed your decision making. And to go into a space of saying, well, I'm going to suspend all my assumptions and I'm going to inquire into them, and I'm going to really think about, what's the problem actually that I'm trying to solve, although I guess Bohm would say that we shouldn't use that word problem. But yeah, I think it's really important that we become comfortable with being uncomfortable, and that we can step into the unknown together and see what emerges. And there are obviously the structure of that. There are the process is the structure that kind of holds it. So for those people that like control, it's not like you're going into total chaos. You're holding structure and order to allow new things to emerge. And you have to trust that process. That's what we obviously always say as a facilitator, trust the process and stay with the disturbance, stay with the chaos, stay with that uncomfortableness, because moving through that will get you to that point of greater insight or new thinking. Yeah, but I can see that this might be a really triggering conversation for some people, because they might be like, well, I don't have the luxury of that. My life is so stressful and I have so many basic, going back to that survive, thrive. If you can't even fulfill your basic survival needs, which lots of people might feel like right now we're facing all these crises, then I can see why control becomes more important, because it's yourself trying to give yourself that sense of security and comfort that you'll be okay, and you couldn't possibly navigate the unknown when you're feeling so stressed and so uncertain. And so we really need to help support people to be in a space where they feel they can thrive, so that they're better able to navigate the unknown and see what can come out of it.
Yeah. And also I think to really appreciate what thrive means. So for instance, imagine somebody who is a single parent, doesn't earn a lot of money, has to have a number of different jobs to be able to survive, but is able to bring up a child by doing that. That's a fantastic achievement, rather than something that is kind of not to be recognized, and you should be aspiring to do something more than that. And sometimes when I'm facilitating, and you've reminded me of a project that I did with a prison, and it was mixed. So there were prison officers and also the people that were serving their sentences in this working session. And it was a creative thinking process, so tapping into people's life experiences. And for whatever reason, the people that were serving their sentences brought so much more to the session than those people that were employed and representing the prison. And I find that in the corporate environment as well. I do quite a bit of work in the facilities management sector. So you're dealing with people that are performing catering roles, security roles, housekeeping roles, and so often they've got much more interesting things to talk about than those people that have been to university, got a job because of their parents, and then fast-tracked to a senior role. So I guess my point, to round it all up, is this thing about people having gratitude for what might seem not to be a particularly privileged situation.
Can you just say a bit more about having gratitude for not a privileged situation?
So appreciating what you do and are doing, whereas perhaps through society's eyes, that's not valued enough. So
Yeah,
that example of bringing up a child.
but I think that's it, isn't it? Like, do you need to appreciate that, or do you need to feel appreciated? And it goes back to that reciprocity and what we place value on, and things I always think about, like dignity in work. So like you were saying about the bin collectors, and I kind of see it, with the man that is responsible for like cleaning the park next to where I live, like that is a really valuable job because he's like a member of community. Like one day I saw him talk to the like this group of young boys that always play in the park, and he was like, oh, there's a youth club, like mobile youth club that's here, like why don't you go get some food, like get involved. Like he's not just cleaning the park, like he's part of that community, and he's looking out for everyone. And like the fact that everyone should feel a sense of dignity and recognition and appreciation in what they do. And for a brief moment we kind of touched on that during COVID, when we were like, oh, all the key workers, like, amazing, we can't live without you, we can't live without the people in the supermarket, we can't live without the people on public transport. But I feel like we've sort of forgotten that now, that we've gone back to the hierarchy of putting all the emphasis on what's your job title, how much money do you earn, like
Yeah.
this distinction between what's dignified work and what's not, and what's valuable to society and what's not. And I guess it's kind of, when we look at the intrinsic extrinsic values, which this is Tim Cass's work on the emphasis that society puts on the extrinsic ones, the external values, what he calls junk values, as being like success and status and money and image. And we don't put emphasis on the intrinsic values, like our inner world, our compassion, our kindness, our creativity. And so yeah, when you bring people together in a non-hierarchical space, like a facilitated space where you're like, we're all here together and we're all of equal value, this is an inclusive space, then yeah, like we're going to see that everyone has something really valuable to share. And that's what we always say in a dialogue, like everyone has a unique set of experiences, and like completely unique to everyone in the 8 billion people in the world. Like your set of experiences is unique to you, and that is valuable. Like if you can share that in a space, in a collective, like dialogic space, you can add your value and your insight, your perspective, your experience, your feelings, your thoughts, and together, like collectively, there's that collective intelligence that we're all part of. Like we all share a consciousness, we all like drink from the same well, the same pool of knowledge, and we give back to that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So but we just don't have many spaces for people to come together in that way in our current like cultures and organizations and societies.
Mm. You mentioned COVID, and I felt myself tense up when you mentioned that, because I remember, the leaders of the country encouraging people to stand on the doorstep and clap for our NHS workers, but then not be willing to pay them a decent level of wage for the job that they do. And there's a guy that I know who kind of operates in the kindness space, and he refers to kindness confetti. I think during COVID, there was a lot of gratitude confetti that was thrown around because people felt kind of obligated or guilty, or I don't know what it was, but it wasn't well-meant gratitude from my eyes, because these, to think how people on the front line were putting their lives at risk and their families' lives at risk when leaders were behaving in a very different way. Just, I don't get angry very easily, but that's one topic that does generate that for me.
Yeah.
So go on.
Well, I was going to say, and we're just seeing it again now with everything that's happening in Palestine and the complete valueless leadership that we have, and that feeling of powerlessness again, of what can we do to change that? And I think that's it. Like that, I feel like the gratitude confetti, it's the interesting thing with values. Like I think that there was probably a lot of genuine gratitude from like just the average like citizen during COVID. But how do you sustain values and like a values-based behavior? Like, because that needs a complete like cultural shift. Like, to really live and embody your values, we can have that intention ourselves, but like ultimately, like we're in a very powerful culture that we've co-created, and that, or that we're a part of, but we're also just one tiny bit of it, and it's not just created by us in it, but by media narratives, political narratives, educational like narratives, which are all actually shaped by one very dominant neoliberal narrative. So that's the challenge. Like, how can we support each other? And I think it just comes down to talk, like, like we did when we had our values dialogues, like the power of just coming together and being able to connect to your own values and share those with others is really powerful. And like that's the only way that we're going to start to create those shifts and sustain our values. I don't know how we change leadership at all. I don't know like how we connect those people that are like so far away from anything that resembles some kind of normal humanity. But so maybe we start closer to home. I don't know.
Yeah, you've reminded me of, I was reading about a lady, this probably is a few years ago now, but I think it was the invasion of Ukraine that started it off for her, because she said she just felt totally helpless. And so she decided that she was just going to be consciously kind every day. And it's the story of how she, did that. And how she felt that it was transformative, not just for her, but she witnessed how it transformed others and the ripple and all that sort of stuff. But what you just touched on there in terms of this, the meeting of our individual actions, but also the recognition that we operate within a system and structure that's being co-created, fascinates me, because how can you expect a certain outcome if the systems and processes are not designed to give you that outcome? And I was talking to somebody recently about, if you think about kids in the education system, where there is an absolute focus on personal achievement. So how do you expect society to be full of anything other than people that are all about personal achievement? And the example that I gave in this conversation was, imagine if at school you studied for 4 days a week to help you do well in your whatever it is. But on the fifth day, it's all about giving to others and playing a part as a community citizen and all of this sort of thing, so that you come out of the education system really understanding that 20% of your time is about giving to others. That might give us some hope in terms of that being the way that society manifests itself. But unless we consciously design those systems, what hope is there? Which is, it's not supposed to sound pessimistic, but it is a bit.
Yeah, we definitely need to consciously design, but first we need, I guess, to understand what change we want.
Yeah.
And it goes back to that slow point of very often people recognize the need for change and then they sort of go, right, well, we need it straight away, and they rush in and then they don't ask enough people. There's not a collaborative co-design process to the extent that's needed, and then they try and push through, like impose change, like, you know, that we say change happens with people, not to people. And it's a little bit like, not to pick apart your very quick educational reform idea, but you know, also giving to people, like it's still creating like a bit of an us and them paradigm, like,
Yeah.
so, you know, is it moving from individualistic personal achievement to like collaborative achievement? And actually not just, oh, I'm going to focus on me and then 20% I'm going to, like, it's like kind of the old school philanthropy model of like, oh, we can have all these billionaires as long as they give some of their money away. Like, no, we just don't need billionaires. So yeah, that's why you'd need a process to kind of surface a lot of these old ways of thinking, how they like interact with new ways of thinking, and whether there's like a totally new way of thinking. So, and that takes time. But then everyone would come back and go, but we don't have time. So this is the paradox that we find ourselves in, that we've been, you know, living with this narrative of urgent, things are urgent, this is urgent, the climate crisis is urgent, everything is urgent, and it is urgent, but our approach hasn't worked, or it isn't working. So how do we do things differently? And is part of that changing our relationship to like fast and slow? I don't know, like I definitely don't have any answers. But yeah, I really think I just think David Bohm, like you know, he's long gone. Like he died in 1992, like, and he had all these, he predicted this. Like so many people probably did, that the way that we think and our inability to communicate properly is going to lead to the destruction of the earth. Like, you know, he was talking about this decades ago, and talking about the dangers of technology before we even really had the level of technology that we have now. So we're not attending to communication the way that we should, and thinking the way that we need to.
Mhm. So I'm conscious of time, and what I think we'll do is bring the Values Jam to a close with two final questions. There is a final question, but before that, there's an opportunity to ask your own question about gratitude. So I'd like to invite you to do this. So ask your own question about gratitude, beginning with who, what, where, when, why, or how, and then we'll both give a pretty quick response before we move on to the final question.
Who, what, when, where, why, how?
Yeah, any of those.
Oh. Can you go first?
Well, it's your question, Jessica, if
Is
you
it
don't
my
mind.
question? Am I
Yeah,
asking it to you?
yeah, you can do. Well, to us, and yeah, I'll go first if you'd like me to.
Mm, it's interesting because I'm kind of drawn to the how, because the how is like the application of it, right? Like how do we encourage more gratitude? But I think again, like people often jump to the doing and forget like the why. So I think I'm going to stick with the why. Why is gratitude important to you?
Okay. So I think this might seem like an oversimplistic response, but I think it's so that, no, it, because it helps me not to take things for granted. Or if you want to frame it positively, it helps me to appreciate things more. So like
Okay.
the bins, like the blossom,
Yeah.
that's why.
I'm tempted to do the 5 whys questioning now and be
Yeah.
like, why is it important to appreciate things more?
So bearing in mind that we're keeping this one kind of short and sweet, what thoughts do you have in response to your question?
Um, yeah, I agree with you that it's important to appreciate things. And I think it puts it in perspective. And it connects me to the things that like sustain and nourish me. And therefore like then connects me back to reciprocity and that kind of, yeah, like I started out with, like it's a kind of connective process of being grateful makes you become present and aware of appreciating something, acknowledging where that thing came from, acknowledging what that thing is doing for you, and then that desire to give back because you appreciate and acknowledge what you've received.
Okay. And the final question is always the same at the end of a values jam, and that is, what are you encouraged to do differently about gratitude as a result of our conversation?
Well, I think our conversation went in quite a few twists and turns, and I am very grateful for the conversation. I think I need to digest it, and I'm grateful that I have the time to digest this conversation because I am not super busy. Um, so I think what I'm going to do differently is probably, yeah, that digestive, assimilative, what I call worm time of really letting the word settle.
Okay. And if it helps, I'll send you a link to the recording so that this won't be published for probably a couple of months. So I'll send you a recording. So if you want to dip into it again, then you can, to help you with that. I've got two things that I'm going to do differently. I didn't know about the Pit book, so I'm going to look that up, and at least read a summary of it, even if I don't read the whole book. And then the other thing that has really struck me out of this conversation is, and is this relating to gratitude? I think it probably can be. So when you were talking about the mono-universal concept of time compared to all of the other different versions of time, that resonated strongly with me because I've got this big question mark against time, or the mono-universal version of it at the moment. And so I'm curious to know more about that. So I'm going to do a bit of digging. And what's that got to do with gratitude? I think that our kind of traditional or commonly accepted view of time kind of does gratitude a disservice, because it's like, you haven't got time to be doing that. You need to be doing something else, kind of thing. So that's something that I'm going to enjoy doing. So go on, what were you going to say?
No, I was just gonna say I really like that it's true. And it sort of makes me think of your friend doing the person you mentioned about the kindness, being kind, because I think very often people feel like they don't have time, like to be kind even. Um, and yeah, I think there's always time to be
There
great.
is, and it's also this thing. So again, there, time is not the relevant application that you need to apply when considering whether kindness can be given right now. So last week I was at the supermarket, and I had a trolley load of stuff, and there was this other person who didn't have very much stuff, and I just said, "Do you want to go ahead?" Now I didn't have to say, "Oh, have I got time? You know, how long is it going to take them to go through?" And she was like thrilled. She's like, "Really? Can I? Oh, fantastic!" So there was definitely value created there. If you take, well, what did it cost you really in terms of time versus what did it give her for whatever, I don't know what her circumstances were, but she was obviously pleased about it. So time would have been absolutely the wrong question to ask and base your actions on. So yeah, right. So we shouldn't open up a conversation because we
Yeah,
just
we could have another one on
yeah.
kindness, I feel like, but
All right. So Jessica, thank you so much for this values jam on gratitude, and I'm really grateful to you for choosing that card.
likewise, thank you. I'm also feeling very grateful. Thanks,
Cheers.
Al.